All right, so welcome. It's great to be here with you all. Um, my name is Jen Turner. I am the executive director at the Center for Trauma and Embodiment and the co-founder of TCTSY along with my colleague, David Emerson. It's great to be here with you. We've been wanting to do this for such a long time to really begin to highlight the experiences and the beautiful work that facilitators are doing in the world. Um, so I'll share a bit more about that and we can get started. But as always, really love to invite each one of us to join this space and this moment with our bodies as well. So if you'd like, we could do a brief form together, a shape. If you're seated in a chair, you might find it useful to kind of give a little space behind your back in the chair so you can move your spine. And if you're interested, one way that we could kind of arrive together and come into this moment could be through movement. So, in your own time, you're welcome to notice your feet on the floor. You could tap your feet or heels, wiggle your toes. You might also kind of notice any contact points of the surface beneath you that are supporting you, possibly even lengthening your spine. And you're welcome here to begin to explore some spinal movement. One way to do that could be to lengthen your spine and lift your chin, possibly then rounding your spine and dropping your chin. So you can move between these two shapes as one possibility. And again, these could be two kind of separate, distinct shapes, or maybe you link them together. Another possibility here could be to link your breath to your movement. So maybe inhaling in one direction, maybe exhaling in another. Possibly continuing for 3. And there might be another way you're deciding to move and kind of arrive in this moment. And 2. And 1. Again, you're welcome to continue to move in that way or maybe another way. But if you'd like, we could kind of gather back together here. Um, so again, so excited that we're having this moment, that we're all here together to explore and talk about this beautiful work that these facilitators do. You know, at CFTE, we've really continued to clarify that our mission and our core focus is around redefining healing by moving trauma care beyond the clinical setting and into daily life. 24 years ago, Dave and I planted this simple but what turned out to be kind of a radical seed that healing from trauma can occur far beyond the walls of traditional psychotherapy and psychiatry. Together, we've built this model of healing that goes beyond the mind and honors people as whole, complex beings with bodies, with intuitions, with deep inner wisdom, and a model that sees PTSD and complex trauma not as a pathology, but as remarkable adaptations to overwhelming experiences. We've also found that this work demands humility. It requires us who serve as helpers, as healers, as creating healing spaces to share power, to stay curious, and center the unique lived and felt experiences of those that we serve. I'm so excited to welcome our guests today here to share more about the work that they do. And maybe we can spotlight them and they can introduce themselves. I'll hand it off first to Grant.
Thanks, Jen. Hello, everyone. My name's Grant. I completed the TCTSY training, I believe it was 2023, the cohort. And since then, I've arrived and found so I'm a licensed certified social worker in Massachusetts, providing individual outpatient therapy in Milton, Massachusetts, and I also facilitate TCTSY at Massachusetts General Hospital's home base program, which is a 2-week rotating intensive clinical program for veterans and active duty military treating PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and polytrauma. Um, and can't wait to talk more about how that's kind of manifested in that setting. And I also kind of on the side, I volunteer with Fireside Project. It's the National Psychedelic Peer Support Hotline, provide crisis intervention, emotional support for those having psychedelic experience, challenging psychedelic experiences, and also providing integration support, where I also kind of utilize TCTSY to enhance trauma-informed support. And so it's been cool to use TCTSY in all aspects beyond just the somatic therapy and how relevant it is to creating containers. Um, so yeah, happy to be here.
Great. So glad you're here as well. I'll add in Esme.
Hi everyone. Um, so I am a certified yoga therapist and I started my TCTSY training, I think around the same time, maybe like 3 years ago. And I've just qualified as a Havening practitioner as well. So I would definitely say, kind of much like you, Grant, it's TCTSY, the foundations of it have really been kind of part of everything I do now. I work in a clinical setting in a psychiatric hospital. So, Jen, when you said about the adaptations to overwhelming experiences, I mean, that really resonated in terms of, when I meet with people in that clinical setting in particular. You kind of meet them as who they are and, rather than seeing them as, a pathology. So I work in a yoga studio as well. So I teach classes and I do TCTSY groups. We do about 2 or 3 10-week groups a year. And I see, yeah, private clients as well. So it's often TCTSY is really kind of at the foundation of pretty much everything I do in terms of the methods. Yeah.
Amazing. Welcome. Thank you. And then we'll um, add it over to Angelica. You'll get us all up here.
Hello, everyone. Excited to be here. I'm Angelica and I use she, they pronouns. I'm located south of Boston, so the Massachusetts and Wampanoag land. Uh, and I've been facilitating TCTSY since 2015, and it's been really a kind of formative experience for me. I started facilitating in my early 20s, so it's kind of shaped a lot of who I am, both personally and professionally, um, which are sometimes hard to separate. So I'm a LICSW as well, so independent clinical social worker. Um, I recently shifted to mainly working in private practice, outpatient therapy with both adults, young adults, and some teens. Um, and in addition to that, do a lot of TCTSY within that space, as well as specific individual TCTSY sessions, and then also working with youth specifically in group settings doing TCTSY. And that's something that's been a great joy, and I'm excited to talk about. And what's kind of happened parallel to that work is I discovered restorative justice and restorative practice around the same time, and find that they're very complementary. The ideas of TCTSY and restorative justice and restorative practice and circle. And so I still do a lot of consulting around restorative practice, specifically in school settings, and with that, bring in components of TCTSY too. So, like Grant and Nes may have shared, it becomes kind of a pillar within my practice as well. So excited to be here with you all.
Great. Thank you so much. Um, so welcome, welcome. And I think that for me, what I love to first kind of speak to and see what you all want to offer and share is about the power dynamics and then the inner work that it kind of requires and asks of us as providers. One of the things that we discovered early on is that, you know, looking at creating opportunity for people to drop into their body in the aftermath of trauma really requires for us to acknowledge, to hold, to shift the power dynamics that are inherent in almost any provider, client, provider, someone seeking healing relationship. And inherent in all power dynamics around trauma is leveraging as power over power abuse. And so for us to really hold and tend to, as facilitators, the ways in which we are granted power just by our privilege, by our education, by often the positions we hold as providers, and how we can both honor that and honor the reality of the frame that we have to hold, and also really be transparent and open about opportunities for sharing power and for or turning power over. And so I'd love to just sort of see if any of you want to reflect on how you approach that work, what it's been like for you. And feel free, you can unmute as you like. I don't need to call on you. If we can flow like that, we could try that out. So anyone's welcome to just jump on in.
Yeah, I mean, this has been, I think, particularly relevant in working with veterans in active duty because of the nature of where they are or have come from, and where many of them have spent significant time of their life or their entirety of their adult lives in the military, where you're legally no longer a civilian, you're property, essentially. Um, and adherence to authority figures is the norm to an extreme that many people will never experience. And that has an effect on people, ranging from positive experience to discipline to dehumanization, depending on how deep or your role. And as they come after in the aftermath of tremendous trauma and suffering, when they view a provider, those structures of authority and that hierarchy are so deep and so unconscious that navigating that has been a priority for me as they come into the space. And as soon as they see a provider, it's, oh, they there's they and we are lower and receiving instruction. And it's been a really an art and a challenge because I only see them for 2 weeks, and then a new cohort shows up of really nurturing this space of flattening the hierarchy where I am as low to or lower to the ground to them, or at least not as superior to them. And it's very uncomfortable for them. It's very unfamiliar, particularly with sometimes we have cohorts of special operations forces, and they hate it. They're like, and I invite them for choice making, and I consistently try to show them I am just, whether it's by dressing more ambiguously or various ways of making myself smaller, and it irritates them because they're seeking what's familiar is this figure to tell them what to do. And particularly the invitational nature of the offerings, it really hits a nerve with them. And oftentimes I find they're like, "Can you just tell me what to do?" And I'm like, "No, no, I won't." Um, and they're like, "Why?" And I'm like, it's a good question. And sometimes it rings a bell, especially if they're veteran, they're no longer in the service, and now they're have all this agency, this civilian life, and they're like, what do you mean? Sometimes they've never been able to make their own choices. And this has it allows it's been a nice point where they're able to choose whether to do something or also do something else or do nothing. And it ranges from being very challenging to being inspiring. And oftentimes, I've found titrating has really become an important part because I only see them for 2 weeks, and sometimes it's too much, or they can only tolerate so much. I found particularly when there are all women cohorts with where almost all of them have military sexual trauma. Um, it can be really too much too fast, and I've had to really rethink how to titrate that, and also reduce the amount or noticing the breath much less. Um, but yes, I mean for me that whole power dynamic is just as much a part of the healing as interoception and just having them view me as a non-threatening, non-authority figure as just, oh, it's Grant, it's yoga guy. He's and I'm in juxtaposition to the other providers that are telling them face their fears, right? Do this. They're much more directive. And then in my space, it's the opposite. As much as I think some of the other therapists try to do trauma-informed care, right? Before even doing TCTSY, I didn't even realize some of the things that we're doing that um, reaffirm some of the relational wounds that have happened. And so, yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that because I could continue to talk extensively just because of the military complex, and that's a whole another conversation. But talk about power dynamics coming from the military. Yeah, it's very real and is a huge part of my work.
Yeah, I think what resonates there for me is that in some ways it's similar for youth and young people who are in positions where often they have very little agency within their lives, especially who are in residential care and treatment settings like that. Um, there's very little access to power, control, agency. And I run into similar challenges where, I offer options and they're looking at me like, excuse me, like, just tell me to wrangle with. And I think something that came up early on, kind of in line with my TCTSY learning, was the restorative practice and restorative justice. And with that, I learned about Vanessa Jackson's idea of power literacy and really looking at the idea of power over, power within, and power with. And so in all of the spaces that I'm in, I'm working my hardest to engage in power with in order to foster power within. Um, and that can be really difficult in some different settings where that isn't the norm. And it's also recognizing the different aspects of personal power and privilege that I hold whenever I walk into a space. Um, and some of those things have stayed the same over time and some have shifted. Um, for example, I started this work before I had a master's degree, before I had a professional license. And the way in which people engaged with me then was different than how they engage with me now. And having letters after my name has changed how people view me in the space. And there's often this pull of, what do I do to feel better? What do I do what can help me with X, Y, and Z? And I think that there's an internal pull for me to be like, oh, let me help you. Let me make a suggestion. And it's always kind of noticing that and doing the internal work of like, am I actually an expert on this? I'm not. they're the expert on their experience. And like, how can I turn this back to them and really kind of foster that power within from that space? Um, but I think the other piece that kind of comes up for me is the idea of the places where I do hold power that um, are just kind of there, power that I might not be able to shift because it's related to systemic situations, like the power that I hold as a white woman, that kind of power, um, trying to be aware of being comfortable with the fact that that is there and how can I actually use that to be empowering? How can I use that to um, to even out some of these structures to foster equity? Um, and that requires acknowledging the power that's there. And it's yeah, like Grant could go on because it's a constantly evolving process.
I'll just jump in quickly if that's all right. Grant, I've had a few experiences with veterans in the clinical space that I work, so I can really feel how that is for you, particularly when you're only working with people for 2 weeks, because it's something that would take such a long time to really shift, particularly when these folks have been in that structure for, all of their adult lives. So I think I try to kind of break it down. So really kind of reduce the choice making options, but really be so clear on the invitational language. So for me, that's kind of the first bit. So I feel like, as long as we're offering and inviting the movements, the shapes, that's the kind of the first bit to start, you know, seeing if they want to or not. And then the choice kind of comes in later, if at all. I remember one person saying, "But what do you want me to do again?" And that happens quite a lot. I'm like, I don't want you to do anything. You don't have to do anything. But if you would you like to? So, it's a real process, but yeah, it's for me definitely the invitational language is the focus with those types of participants when I'm in that setting.
Yeah, I think that's so. Oh, sorry. No, Jen, go ahead.
No, go for it first, and then I'll pick it up.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. Depending on where someone is, like the difference between someone who's active duty and someone who is not active duty is all the difference. Because to ask someone or invite an active duty person to make choices it creates a lot of cognitive dissonance for them. Um, Whereas with the veterans, it's received differently and they're more receptive to it. But also, I recall one individual. He had been in the military, I believe, since he was 18 for 25 years. And when he was at the time, I was also facilitating prolonged exposure therapy in addition to that. And we were asking him about what he would like. Um, And he had this, I'll never forget this. He like looked around and he was almost like there was some shame. And he's like, I'm sorry, but I don't even know what that means. And he meant it. He meant it in a way that he's like, I don't know what it means to have my own personal things or vision or ideas about life. And it was like a whoa. So for someone like that, the process of embodiment and choice making, I mean, years, years, as an adjunct to talk therapy and reintegration into life. I mean, he'll be doing that the rest of his life. And as opposed to someone who's maybe got in and got out for 3 years because of an injury or they are, um, also, one thing I want to add is the difference between someone who's been in the military and got out on their own terms and maybe had a more positive experience with the military where they identify with it, as opposed to someone who was discarded, which is honestly most people seem to be discarded, and they seem to be more receptive to taking over their identity. And so that just the different ways how, like you were saying, just meeting the persons where they are. And it's so tricky when I'm in a group and I can't attend to, so it really is challenging. But and I think to Angelica's pointer about like how do I, as I'm doing this inner work, think about like, am I doing this for them? Am I doing this appropriately? And balancing that with a need to avoid a decision paralysis. And to do the work and be like, could I have done it better? Did I miss that? Yeah, the next time I'll do it better. And I really tried to avoid over. I think I was really getting paralyzed in, oh my gosh, am I embodying this and this? And I was like, okay, we need to really, and balancing that has been really important. And because we're in a setting where we're delivering a product. And so then it's like balancing that has always been an inherent kind of conflict. But anyways, yeah.
You kind of led us where I was hoping we would go, is just to kind of talk a little bit more about that inner work that also has to happen in order to share power in this way. It's something that continues to fascinate me in the work when I think about how, you know, what is it like to seek expertise and learning and continue to learn it and to know things, but also to be willing to completely let that go and defer to the experience of the person that is in front of you. I think you've all kind of mentioned it around like titration, right? What can people tolerate? Where are people at? But also like, what do we bring to the experience of wanting to show up and offer help and offer solutions? You mentioned this a little too, Angelica, and that where you bump up against that and how that then requires us to turn inward and wonder about like, well, why am I here? Or what's my role here? One of the things that I've been so curious about lately is the piece around that we're not entitled to our clients' trust or whoever we're serving. But oftentimes there's this setup of folks come in and are like, I trust you with I'm going to give you everything. And how do we shift that paradigm? That requires some inner work too. And I didn't know if, and either anyone here wanted to share a little bit about kind of some of that process and what that challenge might have been like for you, or times where you've bumped into those edges.
Yeah. I think what immediately comes up for me is working with youth and kids, especially in the types of settings that I've been in. I haven't found that like immediate trust. And so having um started my work within that space where there is no trust of you as an adult coming into the space with power. Um, there is really more of a sense of like you might be the enemy. And so that I think has really been formative of how I just approach now any dynamic where I'm entering the space of I need to demonstrate over and over again that I am a safe person, or am I, like, allow them to decide, and um continue to just kind of show up, like you're saying, Grant, in an imperfect way, in the best way that I can, while also then responding to the feedback that I'm getting. And there's always feedback of, you know, something that I've done for years that has always felt right or resonant for others. There's going to be a participant that's going to come, or a client that's going to come and say like, this actually ended up making me feel this way. And then it's like, oh, okay, like I need to sit with the fact that there isn't one way to be, there isn't one way to show up, and it depends so much on the individual that's in front of me and how my stuff interplays with their stuff, and how we can kind of figure that out.
Yeah, I'll just jump in quickly. I think in terms of like our inner work that you speak of, Jen, for me, it's like it's a dance between my own vulnerability and also healthy boundaries in place, so that there is a clear space in terms of what's being held for people, listening to people when I work with them, so they feel heard, most of my work is done in a yoga setting, so it very much comes from a place where it's like teacher student. So I have to I try to really break down that idea that people come in with to start. Um, but in terms of my inner work, yeah, it's kind of for me really about accessing that vulnerability and honesty so I can meet people at the same place. Um, and that is hard to do sometimes and it takes practice. But yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. If you want to jump
Yeah.
too.
Oh, so, uh, yeah, this is, I feel this has showed up in a different, so I mentioned I volunteer with Fireside Project. It's an app, actually. So those having psychedelic experiences who needing support can go there. And that has been where I feel that inner work it's really shown me, ooh, what's going on? Because in holding support for others, that's when I noticed this desire of there's someone in such the utmost vulnerable state, altered state of consciousness, and they're reaching out for help. And so what I noticed, has been doing it for about 2.5 years, of how initially the urge to caretake and to help and fix and be like, I got you. It was so reflexive that I thought, oh, this is what we're supposed to do. Fortunately, the trainings themselves, they weren't doing TCTSY, but they were also very good about what are we doing? What are the pillars of choice making? And we're not here to fix. We're here to support, create a container, harm reduction. And it took me a while, and it was very hard on the ego to be like, and sometimes there's just tremendous silence because you're on the phone, you're text, you don't see the person. So there's just this black, empty, dead space. And sometimes there's just silence. And I found myself filling the space and afterwards thinking, oh, I did that because they were uncomfortable. But then thinking, oh, no, no, I think I was uncomfortable. And I was caretaking because I was uncomfortable. And really took me years to say, like, okay, when I'm feeling discomfort, that's my discomfort. That's not theirs. And figuring out what is theirs and it's been really, and why do I do that? Well, I also want to feel important. I want to feel I'm good at my job. And I want my colleagues afterwards to be like, wow, you're a rock star. And being like, oh, I like that. But also, ooh, and and how that's been a parallel process to my journey over the past 5 years doing psychedelics and how that itself has really been challenging to see, oh, why do I do things? And do I like getting validation and yeah. And now as a newly licensed, social worker, seeing that with clients is to, am I realizing, ooh, they like me. Do I like that? And also times where they'll say, I think I want a different provider. And be like, the part of me is that's hurt is there. And then also the part that's like, I'm so glad you told me that. Let's get you to someone who you feel better with. Um, Same on the hotline. Sometimes people will be like, I want to talk to someone who's not a man. Great. Let's find you someone. Still hurts me because of my stuff. But that has really been I think that's where that kind of my inner work and realizing it's not about you, Grant, really. Um, but it's been hard. It's hard on the ego, the human, but yeah, that's kind of how it's shown up for me.
Absolutely. And acknowledging, right, that many of us come to this work with our own complex histories too. And so it can tug at all of that. And, um, another thing that I was hoping we could kind of talk about, and this might, maybe these next kind of 2 points can dovetail into one another, is, part of power sharing, which we're already sort of talking about, those co-creating spaces, experiences with TCTSY that are collaborative, that we're creating with the people we're serving. So we're not coming in like, here's the protocol, we have to do it this way. It's like, okay, these are some pillars. This is one way we can do this. What's going to work with the people we serve? And so I'm kind of curious if there are some meaningful learning moments you wanted to share from that kind of co-creating, or even adaptations that had to happen, or that you have found in that process of building a healing space in collaboration with the people you're serving.
Yeah, I've just finished a 10-week course at the yoga studio I work at. So this yoga studio is also a charity. And so we in the past have written bids to get funding so that we can offer free places for TCTSY participants to people who can't afford it. So there is often also very vulnerable people who come along from the community. So with this particular course that we've just done, there was definitely a feeling of evolution. You know, it starts one way and then we kind of grow that space together. Everyone becomes a little bit more comfortable with each other. And I remember when I first trained, there was lots of discussion about really sticking to pure TCTSY. What does that mean? What does that look like? And what I found over the years is that, you know, you've got the pillars of TCTSY, the foundations. And for me, that stays really, really clear. But the outer way that it might look can look different every single time. So if someone says, no, I want to do that, or I prefer it like this, that's what we do. Even if it's not kind of strictly necessarily what you would look at and think of as TCTSY. So I think, again, it's just this dance between kind of being really clear and solid in what you're offering, but then also being able to be really adaptable to who's with you. So I kind of go in with this protocol for each session, and it stays kind of the same. And the last few sessions, we were all just pretty much on the mat, on the floor. We didn't really get up. The pace changed. And as a facilitator, I think one of the most important things that has kind of come up for me is attunement, particularly through this practice. So being really attuned to the energy in the room, the people who I've got with me. You know, we have a consultation, we talk before, so I can get an idea of, you know, their needs and listen to them so they feel held before we even start. So yeah, it can be a really interesting journey, particularly over that length of time. And yeah, so the last couple of sessions looked quite different to what it was at the beginning, and it takes people really quite a long time to to believe me when I say it doesn't matter. You don't, if you don't want to do that, you don't have to do that. So at the end, people are doing different things at different times, which totally looks different to the beginning. And every course that we do just has a kind of a different energy because it's got different people. So there'll be different, you know, maybe different things. We might leave a little more time for kind of chatting or feedback at the end if the group likes that. Other groups haven't really been into that, so we don't do that. So yeah, it has to be adaptable, even though it's kind of the foundation is really solid in what we're offering.
Yeah, that that really resonates for me and how I've found my TCTSY practice kind of shift over time. And my first experiences facilitating were within the trauma center doing small group sessions, and that looked very much like, you know, what one might envision when they think about a TCTSY space and time. And shortly after that, shifted into doing more of this work with youth and young adults and teens. And the contrast there is so fascinating and to me really fun because it can be a totally different thing in a way. It's the pillars, the foundations, the language and the approach are still there, but it looks different because I'm kind of letting kids take the lead and they don't want to do an hour long kind of flow through different forms. Often what I'll end up getting, you know, a 13-year-old might come in and say like, I feel like doing push-ups and jumping jacks today. And so that's what we do with the language of TCTSY, with the pillars of TCTSY. Or similar to what you're saying, Esme, there's sometimes like, I feel like 16 is often the number where they come in and they're like, I am so tired. I just want to lay here. And that's our TCTSY practice. Um, and it's been really interesting then to kind of translate that to the authority figures who are bringing me in to offer TCTSY and saying she just laid there the whole time. She didn't do yoga. And it's, explaining that, well, actually, she practiced choice making there. She took effective action. She did all of these different things that were really important, and actually much more important than if we did a warrior two or not. Um, and I recently was working with an 8-year old doing some private sessions with him, and um, he needed to kind of be all over the place. And his mom would sometimes, like, we often practice outside in their yard, and his mom would like peek out sometimes and be like, "Hey, don't forget to do the yoga." And I was like, "Oh no, like we're doing TCTSY. Like we're exploring the leaves right near now. We're pretending what it might feel like to be a leaf. Like, but it's within those pillars of choice making, interoception, um, and all of that is still happening, even when it looks so different, so kind of untraditional."
Yeah, this so much to say. But I this has working in a hospital setting and doing most of my TCHSY in a hospital setting, I feel that it has been challenging to try to co-create when there's an oppressive nature of you have this much time, you gotta do it, you gotta do it, you gotta do this, and how are they doing? And are they participating appropriately? And I remember being like, Grant, don't try to minimize the snark when they say these things, because I was like, I remember one time I was like, oh, are they participating appropriately? I'm like, what does that mean? And there's like, what do you mean? I'm like, no, no, what do you? And it is. I was like, okay, great. Just don't have to. But it's. I feel my efforts to co-create have been to push back onto the authority, and as I am doing what I can to co-create in ways that are what I can do. So, for example, if I can, like first session, they'll come in and everyone puts the mats like very like aligned and everything's perfect, and like, oh my gosh, like is this right? I'm like, and then how by the following session, the second week, it's great to see the mats are off kilter. They're weird angles. People are in the doing their own thing, and the room has become this disaligned, non-organized thing. And I'm like, those are small wins for me, where I got them to at least feel they didn't have to do it in this way. Or other ways is what's come up, and this is phone use. Oftentimes, though, people will bring their phones in and use it, and I have to report kind of behavior to the providers. They'll say, "Oh, like why didn't you tell them that they shouldn't use their phone?" I'm like, "Well, that's a direct conflict with the pillars of TCTSY." And so I communicated after a while that what is TCTSY and how this shows up, and that unless it's extremely disruptive, I'm not going to call it out because that would create more harm than good, in my opinion. And it took them a while to understand why that's relevant for like a relational aspect. And I think they're shifting more towards that and how their choice to use a phone while doing it, that is TCTSY in a way. Or sometimes I will always offer them the ability to leave and come back, whether to use the restroom or because you want to. And then I'll report, how much time they spent, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, why didn't attend the entirety? So did they participate partially?" I'm like, they participated, they just opted to use their choice to leave and come back." And those have been the ways that I tried to co-create spaces, but it's been frustrating because I want to do so many things, and um, it's hard in an oppressive setting with like an institution like Mass General, which is we do things a certain way that is the gold standard, and we do things the right way. And I'm like, yeah, okay, good, it's great. Have fun with that. But So trying to mix things up and bring some of that levity and that pushback, but it's really hard in that setting, and I am often frustrated and makes me want to do my own thing. But for now, yeah, I struggle with that.
Just quickly on that, in clinical settings, one of the challenges I have come up against a few times, and there's lots of different staff where I work. It's an inpatient psychiatric unit, and they'll go around and they say, "Oh, I've tried to persuade him to come, or I'll try and persuade her to come." I'm like, no, 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 no. Don't persuade them. Just let them know I'm here. I can come and chat to them. If they've got questions, we can meet face to face. But, the ideas and the way that people view it, oh, the yoga lady's here. Let's see if we can persuade people to come. I'm like, no, this is a different kind of thing. If they want to come, that's great, and we'll have a chat and da da da. But yeah, I feel how difficult that can be when we're coming in with all this understanding can be a real conflict against the kind of structures that we're working in.
I'm struck so much by the non-prescriptive, approach of TCTSY and how that bumps up against that. Most care models and facilities and approaches have a prescriptive mentality, and of course that makes sense to a degree, but also it can be really agitating to the system when we show up in this completely different way that is um, really client led. It's really, if someone is titrating their experience or buffering the intensity of their experience by looking at their phone, that's a good choice. That's actually a choice that someone is making in order to regulate themselves or disconnect from the experience. Some people might dissociate, some people might leave the room, but like that to me is empowerment, actually. It's just that healing doesn't look like the way we think it should look like as providers. I think we can get so caught up in this kind of linear thing. It's like, okay, this is a 10-week series and we're going to see this progression, and that's when I think in real time we get asked to let go of this sense of expectation of what this is going to look like, and that can be almost a daily practice. Each one of you described it so beautifully around, letting go of, okay, we're not going to do yoga forms, we're going to play in the leaves, or we're going to let someone be on their phone, or we're going to change the structure, or we're going to have more time for conversation. Like, all of that is exactly the work, and um, pushes back against almost all other kind of gold standard for treatment that are so manualized and so rigid. It's manualized, right? There are rigid pillars, but there's so much spaciousness too. And I love hearing you all share about the ways that shows up in real life and in your
Yeah.
work.
Or just like,
And
oh no, Angela,
Jen,
go keep talking.
thank you. I was just going to say, Jen, that I think the other thing that comes up then is the way in which even TCTSY, when we're doing this maybe small group or one-on-one work, can also so often I feel like dovetail into systems work and social justice work. And there's all these ways in which we're pushing back against a status quo that um, isn't necessarily working, isn't necessarily in the best interest of the folks who, it claims to serve. So that's been an interesting part of TCTSY for me too, is being that dynamic and what my role can look like within that.
Juggy, you literally read my mind. I feel like we're telepath. Like, yes. I have noticed it's almost scary that a lot of, trauma-informed phrase and client-centered are these phrases that I hear everywhere. And Mass General prides itself on like so trauma-informed, so client-centered. And yet many of the behaviors and the system behaviors are quite the opposite. I was struck by almost in the same breath, we are so trauma informed and then blah. I'm like, we're not seeing how, like, for example, the punitive nature of a lot of like the lack of compliance, like, oh, they didn't attend. Did this person not attend? oh, we'll bring it up with them in individual therapy. I'm like, that's probably going to cause a lot of relational hurt. If they're confronted about, oh, bad shaming, maybe not the best way to do that. But like complete, just not, it's like, oh, we didn't think about it that way. I'm like, I can understand that. Or talk about even different systems that we have a substance abuse, a very strict substance use. Often they'll come in with co-occurring, substance use and they're drug tested every morning.
Yeah.
Um, so great. It's like they're lined up, pee in a cup. Okay, thank you. And if there's any, even out, sometimes they're false positives, or sometimes they're like, oh, you tested for alcohol. It's like, "Oh, I had a couple of drinks." They have one warning, and then they're discharged from the program if it happens again. I was like, is that really the best approach? Granted, there's situations where someone is so intoxicated that they need a higher level of care. It's not appropriate. Sure. That rarely, if ever, happens. I've never witnessed that to happen in 2 years. Whereas someone who is tested positive for alcohol then a series of several days and yet was quite part of the program was just discharged. And I'm like, I think you probably did a lot more harm than good. And it just shows like this punitive nature, despite saying we are trauma-informed, client-centered, and yet being so punitive and just have that conflict is just it's so apparent. But at least wait, well, having done TCSY and seeing this, it's really helped me with like Angelica, you're like talking about justice, systems work, and frustrating, and also being like, I can't do everything at once, but at least I can point it out. Um, and but yeah, it really it's so true. Now I see it in places where I'm like, whoa, that's not really agency or embodiment or choice making, and you're doing a lot of relational harm. Separate from any like combat trauma, a lot of them have complex trauma from childhood. Um, and how that just reinforces that. So,
Yeah, yeah, indeed. And I think that, so much of the work that we're asked to do is that being trauma informed or trauma sensitive is a practice. It is not a stamp. It's not it's an ongoing thing where we continue to unearth these systems that we're all indoctrinated in, all of us, even if we have the best intentions or we've done this training. So it takes that continual work. And I think that's really hard on a systems level for people to continue to engage in, to really look at, okay, well, what about this policy and this approach? And when we're doing this work, we're still like squirreling away doing this like amazing work that does have an impact, but it can be hard when you're in these big systems and structures for sure. I want to make sure that we have time if folks have questions. I don't know if anyone has a question that they wanted to kind of pose to either the group or anyone in particular. Feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself. I appreciate the comments in the chat as well. A lot of interesting, kind of points folks are bringing up around sort of the system and compliance, also around what professionals knowing better than what we know, and how that can be a long journey, right? To center that trust and to begin to even build a relationship with our internal world, let alone trust the cues we're getting from that internal world, and then decide to act on them. Right. And then, of course, the fixing that Anna shares too. I think that, you know, um, one of the reasons I love doing this work is because as much as you all spoke about some maybe different inner work you've done, it doesn't ask us to be like the experts on healing. We get to be the experts or continue to hone our expertise on holding space, on witnessing, on being with, as opposed to um, like achieving something. Because I think there's also a built-in understanding in this work that the nature of it is cyclical, that things continue to come back around. It's like, oh yeah, no, I need to revisit that introception thing because I've been activated lately and I can't access it. Or choice making has been hard because I'm being pulled into a pleasing place. And, I think that there's a nature of the work that is so much about that space holding as opposed to um, answers knowing, achieving.
Yeah, Jen, I think that's one of the really big things that's kind of developed over the last few years for me is space holding and like what does that mean? And I think when I spoke about the vulnerability, it's like being able to recognize your own vulnerability and sit with that. That's kind of how I try to then hold that space for other people. And like you were saying, it's not about fixing. We don't have to control our breath. We don't have to do it a certain way because we're doing it wrong. We just go with what is. And when you find that acceptance with what is, that's where this kind of healing comes from. Mm.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, I want to thank you all for being here, and thank everyone for attending. We'll send out the recording, and we're planning to do these, kind of every quarter. Um, really grateful to have you all here, and thank you so much to all our facilitators sharing your experiences, your insight, your wisdom. Um, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you,
Thanks so
everyone.
much,
Your pleasure.
everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just stay on a minute or two to see if there's anything else. Great, thank you, Hillary. All right, beautiful. All right, and feel free to be in touch as you like. We're here, and we'll see you again soon.